A big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. If you need a website or a domain, go to squarespace.com/James for 10% off your first purchase.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to Cricieth here in northwest Wales. And I say welcome back. A few months back, I came here and had a botched attempt at doing some photography. Rained a lot, I didn't have a rain jacket, so I went home after about an hour. But I'm back today, and we'll hopefully spend a lot more time than that taking photos. And I faced you exactly the wrong way. I should be facing you that way really, because there's a very nice castle here, but I'm very excited to be out today. It's been a couple of weeks since I've been out with a camera, and whenever that is the case, I realise how much I need to get out with a camera. Both for my job, to pay the bills, but also just for my sanity, frankly, which is why I started taking photos years and years and years ago in the first place. So it's nice to be out. Well, it's 5.5 hours later-ish, and I'm having a lovely day. Much of this morning I spent here in Cricieth, walking around, taking some photos, drinking good coffee, found a nice spot for lunch, but then I decided to drive 2 or 3 miles down the coast to a place called Cricieth, which I think could work in different conditions, but the tide was all the way out, sun was very high in the sky, so I'll revisit there. Now that I've come back to Cricieth, all over the place really. I find that when I've not been shooting much, I find my instinct is to constantly try and switch locations. I always think the grass is greener. I don't know whether to stick or twist, and invariably I end up twisting. Often it's not worth it, including today. So yeah, a real weakness of mine, I think, as a photographer, particularly when I've not been shooting much. I can't resist going somewhere else, because I think it's going to be better. That said, actually, locations, I'm terrible for constantly switching, but scenes, I think I have developed quite a good way of establishing whether I should move on from a particular scene or not. You know, if I'm somewhere and I'm looking for a specific photo, I think I've worked out a way to judge whether I'm going to get that photo or not get that photo in as short amount of time as possible. And it's something I call the 5-minute rule. I say I call it that. I've not called it anything before because it's just been me doing it. It's not needed a name. I'm going to call it the 5-minute rule. So basically, I should probably find an example for this actually. We'll go and find an example. What better example to use than the scene that took up most of my morning? This seawall here. And let's suggest, for the sake of this example, that what we're waiting for is somebody who's wearing an interesting hat. Seems as good as anything else. Now the 5-minute rule, and this will shock you, entails hanging around at your scene and paying attention to what's happening for 5 minutes. And the reason that I do this is it's quite difficult sometimes when you first rock up to a place to work out how long it's going to be before you might see the sort of subject that you're wanting to see for the kind of photo that you're wanting. Could be 10 minutes, could be 20 minutes, could be an hour, could be 3 hours. It's very difficult to tell. If you hang around for 5 minutes though, and pay attention to the kind of people that you're seeing, whether you're seeing people at all, and this applies to things like cars, birds, changes in light that might occur over a period of time, if you've got scattered clouds, for example. If you pay attention to how many things are happening within those 5 minutes, then you can use that 5 minutes to extrapolate out and try and work out how long it might be before something interesting happens. So for example, if you were to wait here for 5 minutes and you were to see about 100 people walking to and from the end of the sea wall, then you might expect that before long, one of those people is going to be interesting. If, however, you wait 5 minutes and you don't see a single person walking where you want them to walk, whether they're interesting or not, you might expect that it's going to be a long time before you're likely to see somebody who looks remotely interesting. And so yeah, 5 minutes in short is quite a short amount of time. It far from guarantees you a photo, but what it does do is gives you a sense of how long it might be before you see a photo opportunity. And it's not an exact science, and more often than not, you'll walk away after 5 minutes and then the exact thing you were waiting for will happen. So maybe it should be 6 minutes. But if you're anything like me and you're addicted to screens and you have the attention span of a goldfish, 5 minutes of not looking at your phone, not letting your mind wander, and purely paying attention to what's happening in front of you feels like a long period of time. And if you do that a dozen times in a day, that's obviously an hour. It's quite an exhausting process, but fully worth it in my opinion when you're trying to gauge whether you should stay at a scene or whether you should give up on it. And it's all about probabilities. There are no guarantees in this, but I find it quite a useful way of turning a guess in terms of whether something's going to happen or not into a bit more of an educated guess.
I am useless, I think, at talking through the photos that I'm taking through the course of a video. Some channels do it brilliantly. They'll talk about what has caught their eye, what they're hoping to photograph, how they're going to do it, how they're going to edit it, all that kind of stuff. And I just hardly ever do that for a few reasons. Sometimes I forget. Sometimes I take so many photos that I don't really know which ones to feature, and I don't know if any of them are worthy of featuring until I get home and I assess them. And sometimes I do just genuinely want the photos to sort of stand on their own 2 feet and not have to explain them too much. But I've recently acquired an iPad, so I thought this is the perfect way to use it, and I do want to start talking a little bit more about what it is that I'm thinking when I'm out in the field, in case it's of interest. So, well, there's one way to find out, isn't there? So let's start with this photo, which is probably my favourite of the day, I'd say, from that day out. Features the seawall, obviously, as you can see, and this was late morning when the light was probably at its harshest. But it works quite well here because, how do I annotate? Because of the light that's being reflected from this concrete here. And it makes the light fall off on the wall really quite pleasant, I think, and you get lots of detail on this seawall that well, you wouldn't otherwise get in such harsh conditions unless you had this. Also, this couple, they're looking out to sea, but I don't know what it is that has caught their attention. Now, had there been something very obvious that they were looking at, right at the edge of the frame, let's say somewhere like that, to be honest, I probably would have considered cropping it out because I think the photo is more interesting not knowing what it is that they're looking at than having the answer to what it is that they're looking at. And that's one of the best photography tips I've ever had, I think, giving your audience more questions than answers, because questions and curiosity is what keeps people coming back to photos. So as it stands, I didn't need to crop because there was nothing obvious there to crop out anyway. Other photos, I quite like this one too. I don't particularly like the light. Again, very harsh light. Yeah, nothing particularly visually appealing about the light. But what I do like about this photo is the boat on the right hand side is very clearly perfectly fine. The boat in the background on the left is very clearly not. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's water seeping in there. And the boat in the middle is both physically in the middle, but perhaps operationally in the middle as well, because this guy, I think, was doing some kind of maintenance work and looks to be doing some kind of maintenance work. I mean, you don't typically try and get into a boat when the tide is out and it's beached unless you're doing maintenance, right? This one I quite liked. I stopped for this one on the side of the road on my way back to Cricieth from Borthagest. And there's a few reasons I like this. If you watch this channel regularly, you'll know really why I like this. It's a perfect balance of human and nature, and I like exploring the relationship between those two things. I like this foliage on both sides of the barn opening. That looks quite cool. And this big colourful bush I quite like as well. Elements I don't like though, and what sort of ruins the photo for me, is all this stuff up here. Because if it wasn't there, this hill line would, I think, look really quite attractive and pleasant to look at. So yeah, those trees in the background, I think, are a bit of a shame. But never mind, I'm still reasonably pleased that I stopped. And then finally, just a couple more examples of when I was in Cricieth, there were some shots that could have been really good, but they just didn't quite work. The things in the scene that I thought were interesting just weren't quite prominent enough in the scene. So this one, I like this crow down here. I like the people on the seawall, obviously, but they're just too small. And if you were to crop in, you lose the castle and you lose lots of the scene that is also of interest, I think. And then this one is kind of a similar example. You've got this mother and child playing on the beach, and you can see the reflections in the wet sand as well, which I quite like. And I took a number of photos of this scene, and one of them that I really quite like is the fact that here you've got the mother pointing at a seagull in the sky. And so I think there are really interesting things going on in the frame, but I don't think they're interesting enough in and of themselves to crop into those things. And when you have a wider scene, I don't think they're obvious enough to make the photograph particularly interesting, even though there are things within the scene that are interesting themselves. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, that was a bit of a shame. But very common that you end up with photographs that have interesting things in them, but yeah, not quite enough to make the photograph as a whole interesting. Anyway, thank you very much for watching another video. I really appreciate it. And also a huge thank you to everybody who has pre-ordered my book. There are still a few days to go when I put this video live to pre-order the book and get your name in it. You've got until the 1st of August if you'd like your name in the book as a thank you for ordering so early in the process. I'll be receiving the books in a couple of months' time, and then I'll be dispatching them immediately. So big thank you for your support on those. And also a huge thank you to Squarespace, who are the sponsor of this video. And Squarespace basically is at the very heart of my business. It's obviously what I use to promote my new book. It's what I've always used to sell my prints and my presets. It's what I use to show my portfolio. I use it to send newsletters. I've got a bit of a blog on my website as well. And I can do all of that without knowing a single line of code. And I think having a website is absolutely crucial to all photographers, somewhere that you control exclusively outside of the social media platforms, where you're basically at the peril of algorithms and such. And you can try it out for free by going to squarespace.com to start a free trial. And after that, if you'd like to make a purchase, just go to squarespace.com/James to get 10% off your first purchase. And big thank you to Squarespace for their continued support of this channel. And to you for watching. Next time, I won't be in Wales. No, I definitely won't be in Wales. Lots of travel coming up. Hopefully I'll see you then. Cheers.